Hey, all right, so this is the first of a number of different types of videos we're trying out these days, so bear with me. This is the Outer Planet Children, Part 1, Interpreting the Charts, of Children and Youth with Outer Planet Connections. So before we begin, I want you guys to keep in mind a couple of things that are very, very important when we look at astrology charts, and especially when we look at the astrology charts of children and youth, and that is that your chart is only 50% of who you become. The other half of who you are and who you become in life is a result of combinations of external influences, such as the time period you were born in, the society and culture you were born in, as well as the circumstances, opportunities, and support that you receive. How you manifest your chart is not a simple 1, 2, 3 predictive affair. So you might have all the makings of a phenomenal business mogul, but if you were born in a different time period, in a different culture, in a different civilization, in the wrong race, gender, or class, your business acumen may be limited or directed into other expressions than traditional business simply because of the opportunities that were there or not there, as the case may be. So when we look at a chart, it is literally blueprint of potentials, but the most important thing to remember is that when we look at a chart, what we're really looking at is the unfoldment and the evolution and the development of a human soul. So all of these external things are a tiny pittance compared to the real treasures that are occurring inside a person. And all these things on the outside are literally just representative of experiences that contribute as like a playground or an exercise gym for this person who develops very specific qualities within themselves. And the other thing you must keep in mind always and forever, if parenting were easy or simple, we'd all be doing it better. So, first rule of the universe, don't panic. Second rule of the universe, if you haven't had the experience, your opinion does not count. So for those of you who have parented or had children, you know exactly what I mean. And you also know that parenting is not only not an easy job, most of us have no idea what we're doing, and we're kind of winging it and trying to do the best that we can. We also know how easy it is to look at other people and assume that we know better than they do how to be a good parent or how we would do something differently. But at the end of the day, we also know that there are many things that we could probably have done better as well. So we're never as perfect as we'd like to be, and it's very easy to assume that we are in a position to tell other people how to do it better. So remember, when you're dealing with children, the thing about it is it's not just about, being like the perfect parent. You also have to remember that this is, no matter how much DNA you've given to this child, 50-50 between you and the other parent, at the end of the day, this is still a whole human being that's in the process of developing into a functional adult with their own personality, their own life experiences they have to go through, and their own character development. So there's a whole lot going on that makes this an individual person separate from who we think they could be just by genetic inheritance. So with that said, that also means that parent-child relationships and parenting can be very challenging and difficult and fraught with complications because at the end of the day, we still have personality conflicts. There are still relationships that we are having separate and in addition to the parent-child dynamic. There's a lot going on in family relationships. So when we look at the charts of children and youth for the parents, because that's typically who would be paying us, not the kids, right? We also have to be mindful of how delicate and how fragile these relationships are, and how easy it is to seem like we know something that we don't as far as the other person's experience. So it's not just the chart of the child we're looking at, it's the chart of the child and their relationship with their parent. Okay, and it's also the parent themselves. Oftentimes, when you're doing these types of charts, the challenge is not the child, the challenge is actually the parent. Whole other conversation. All right. Okay, so because we love pop quizzes around here because it makes you think. So here are two charts. Now these two charts are very good charts that I'm using as an example. I'm not going to give you too much information about them. So the first chart on the left, you're going to see a chart with a Moon-Pluto opposition, which right there off, and the Moon's in the 8th house. So right there off the bat, we've got a whole lot of, oh my God, going on, right? The other thing is that this person has Uranus rising on the chart, squaring Jupiter, magnifying it. So that in and of itself also is an indication that we might have a crazy person on board. Uranus angular is not an easy position. And then, as if that weren't enough, Moon-Pluto opposition, Uranus rising, and there's a Venus-Neptune square. So some people might look at this, especially with the Venus-Neptune square, and their first thoughts would be all the keywords that typically come with Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune. Like, oh my God, like drug addict, trauma victim, alcoholic, whoa, mental patient. And all of these things could very well be true. I mean, I don't know this person personally, so it's possible. But what is also true is that this is not the entirety of the person and what they're capable of in life. So for someone to have said to this person's parents, you know, very early on in their life, oh, well, your child is clearly going to have, you know, addiction issues and, you know, oh my God, rape, trauma, murder, death, whoa, criminal activity, whoa. You can imagine how fraught with anxiety the parents of this particular person would have been, and how this might have altered the course of their life as they were moving forward. And we're going to talk about that person more in a second. So I just want you to kind of take a look at that chart and think about what you're seeing for a second. I'll tell you what's notable about them as we go forward. The other chart, we've got a Mars squaring Neptune Chiron. It is an out of sign square, so it's a bit of like a hidden aspect, and it's kind of wide, so it's not really tight. But again, with Mars, Neptune, Mars, Chiron square, you know, there's some, oh, sorry, scratch, right? There is some question, you know, about wounds, you know, the great wound. And we'll talk about that as well. There's also, with this particular person, one of the things I want to point out is there's not a lot of very heavy emphasized outer planet stuff going on here, right? So we've got Mars squaring Neptune. It's pretty wide though, and it's out of sign. We've got Mercury and Saturn quincunxing Uranus. As a matter of fact, one of the only aspects to a personal planet in his chart with Uranus is Mercury and Saturn, and it's a minor aspect. It's a quincunx or an inconjunct. And then the last thing we have is Jupiter, which is kind of a personal planet, kind of not, in T-square with Uranus and Pluto. And more important, Pluto is the leg of this T-square, not Uranus. So outside of that, we're not seeing a lot. As a matter of fact, we're not seeing anything over here. We're not seeing anything over here, right, with the personal planets that is even close to this. Holy cow, right? So with these particular aspects, and you know what we are generally told about people who have these aspects, it would make you really wonder if these people are even capable of getting through adult life with their sanity intact. And some people would say that they weren't, and that they did not. You know, that they were more than a little, you know, wackadoodle, as it were, and probably in need of medication, wreaking havoc and chaos everywhere they went. But the other side of this is that with outer planet presence, outer planet connections with the personal planets in the chart, one of the things that makes it very important is that these people are having experiences that are not common to normal people. So, because these are transpersonal planets. So one of the challenges with transpersonal planets is that very often the person becomes symbolic or representative of something to other people that is beyond themselves. So it's not something they choose to themselves. They don't choose to become a similar identity for other people, or a representation or a projection screen for other people's issues, but that is frequently what will happen. So people are often dealing with them, but not dealing with them, like they're dealing with them as they interpret that person to be, not who they actually are. So it can make life pretty challenging for the outer planet person, and that's a whole other thing. So For those of you who are a little experienced with astrology, I want you to enjoy this for a moment. So I just want you to put the video on pause for a second and really look at these charts and think about what everything that you know about these charts or these aspects and these planets and what you've been told, right? And try to interpret them yourselves and kind of get a sense of what kind of person you would expect to be dealing with. And more importantly, what you think would be most notable or what is the word I'm looking for? Not recognizable, but recognition worthy, most significant about this person and their life or their person or what they do. Like, what is it that you think jumps out at you about this person that you would notice with these charts? Oh, sorry. I swear I'm going to start taking a Benadryl before I do these videos. I'm going to take an antihistaminic, I swear. All right, so this is the chart on the left. This chart is the one with crazy rising, Uranus rising, that Venus-Neptune square, and that Moon-Pluto opposition. So, you know, this right here with all these outer planets in really tough, very, very visible aspect in this chart, like this is some stuff here. And, you know, you might be wondering, like, how on earth does anybody get out of bed in the morning and keep their sanity, much less function in the world with these kinds of aspects, right? Like, what on earth would a person do with their life with this sort of stuff? I mean, this person could be a drug dealer, right? Moon-Pluto opposition, Venus-Neptune square. This person could also be a serial killer, Uranus rising, you know, in Moon-Pluto opposition, crazy person rising, and Sun, Mars, and Gemini. Ooh. Right? So there's a whole lot of different manifestations from one extreme to the other that could be showing up with this chart. So, you ready to find out who it is? Sally Ride. This is the chart for Sally Ride, the first female astronaut in the United States. And this is her chart. Now, here's what's really, I thought, very impressive about her, above and beyond being a first female astronaut. Apparently, Ms. Ride was able to solve quadratic equations in her head. Like, without pencil and paper, she could just solve quadratic equations in her head. Now, for those of you who, like myself, have no idea what a quadratic equation is or what one looks like, this is off the cuff in her head without paper and pencil. That's pretty impressive. So when we look at, it will not go backwards. So when we look at her chart with that Uranus rising, Uranus often is associated with geniuses, right? So that would kind of make sense. Rising, maybe genius rising. But she's also got that Venus-Neptune square across the angles and with Venus in the first house. So what is that about? Well, let's talk about Neptune for a second, because Neptune often gets and Pisces often get a very bad rap, which is unfortunate. So they literally do not get the credit that the fair credit that they are due for the things that they are responsible for. So Neptune is the planet of water, the ocean, the life-giving thing that we need. And just like water, people often take it for granted. The things that we need the most to live are often the things we take for granted the most, just like water. So the symbol for Neptune is here, and it looks a lot like an anchor. My anchor's really bad, right? So it looks a lot like an anchor that we drop in the ocean to keep us in place. The thing about Neptune is that Neptune represents the oceans, and the ocean, water, represents consciousness, unconsciousness, subconsciousness, superconsciousness, all conscious forms of consciousness. It's the ocean of experience. So anchor is dropped into the ocean, the other side of Neptune. And remember, Neptune is the sign of the fishes going in the opposite directions, right? So there's Neptune symbol, the ocean, and then there's Neptune symbol, the anchor. So when Neptune drops that anchor into the ocean of consciousness, also what that represents is being stuck, because we drop an anchor with someplace where you don't want to move away from, you want to stay there. When an anchor is dropped in Neptune's ocean, this often shows a place where we're stuck in life. And this is where addictions and escapism and sleeping too much and watching too much TV and working too much and sleeping around with people you shouldn't be sleeping around with and lying and all those negative Neptune associations, this is where it comes in, because the person is trying to dissolve their attachment to the thing that they are stuck to, or the place where they are stuck at in their consciousness. So very often when you find People who are addiction counselors will often tell, and therapists will often tell you that when you're dealing with somebody who's struggling through an addiction, oftentimes there's something in their psyche or their history or their consciousness that they're trying to get away from, and they've run out of alternatives and tools in terms of detaching from the problem. So now it's just a way of kind of medicating themselves to make it less painful, because being stuck hurts, right? So Neptune represents the ocean and consciousness, and just like the anchor that is dropped into that ocean of consciousness, the key to getting unstuck from those hurting places is to dissolve it with consciousness. Now, some other things that I thought were very interesting about this, Neptune was the first planet to be discovered only through mathematical calculations rather than astronomical observations. That's pretty impressive. Our slippery, fish, foggy Neptune that likes to hide in the seaweed and out of sight, because Neptune does not like being the center of attention, or a lot of attention, or spotlights for that matter, and loves to play hide and seek. Apparently it was so good at hiding they had to do math calculations to find it, because it would not allow itself to be revealed with human eyes in a telescope. So the thing about this that I found was interesting, typically, not always, but typically, one of the interesting things about Mercury with Neptune or Mercury in Pisces is you'll find people with these aspects, Mercury conjunct Neptune or in aspect with Neptune or Mercury in Pisces, they're typically, not always, but typically very gifted with numbers. The math comes in very easily, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing. So we don't think of Neptunians as being logical, right? And math is a very logic-based kind of thing. But Neptune apparently has domain and rulership over numbers and mathematics. High mathematics, not basic 1 + 2 + 3 sort of stuff, but advanced mathematics, right? Abstract mathematics is Neptune's thing. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that Aquaman, who's considered the redheaded stepchild of the comic book universe, because Aquaman gets no love. Everybody takes Aquaman for granted. Because what does he do, dude? Like, he just swims around and talks to fishes. Aquaman is in theaters with Jason Momoa. And doing really, really well. They've done a beautiful job of turning this into a movie, and lo and behold, Neptune is in Pisces. So Neptune, the Lord Neptune back in his watery sign of Pisces, and Aquaman is in box office theaters, changing our mind about the superhero we often took for granted. So I thought that was pretty cool, pretty cool. Now, of course, Sally Ride has Venus square Neptune. Venus is in her first house, Neptune is in her fourth, which is technically not a Mercury aspect, but it's still a strong Neptune aspect, and it does involve her first house. So I think there may be something there. She may have had, I would guess she had a photographic memory, maybe. More investigation is needed on that, but that's for another video, or we're going to be here for a week doing this video. Okay, this is the second chart. This is the one on the right. So this person, if you look, right? So let's look at our outer planets, because this is important, right? So right here, we've got Uranus. Uranus is not really making a lot of aspects. In fact, the only aspects it's really making is a quincunx to the node, which we're not going to use because the node's not even a planet, right? And a quincunx to Mercury and Saturn in the part of fortune. And it's a quincunx, it's a minor aspect. So not even really feeling like using that. Outside of that, there are no other hard aspects to this Uranus, right? Well, let's go to Pluto, okay? So maybe we've got, because this person is important. This person has literally made contributions that have changed the world and the future. So we would think, right, there should be something, right? Maybe some Neptune, maybe some Pluto. So let's look at their Pluto, right? So Pluto, what do we got here? Do we have anything in Pluto? Well, the closest thing we have is a Jupiter-Pluto square. Okay, and again, Jupiter is a personal planet, but not so personal. Yeah, maybe, I mean, kind of sort of we can use it. Jupiter-Pluto squares are a very powerful aspect when they are used, but in and of themselves, unless they're being used, they're not going to do a lot. Well, you know, not to the degree that it manifested in this person's life. So this leaves us with Neptune. Remember Neptune, right? You know, the drunk, the drug addict, the con artist, the liar, the crazy person, the mental institute patient. Like, pick a horrible description of Neptune and that's what you're going to get, right? And this person has Neptune not really doing anything, right? So let's go to this for a second. So here, oh, the yellow's not really showing up, is it? We have Neptune conjunct Chiron. Well, that's not great. That definitely looks like somebody who might be a drunk or a drug addict, right? You know, based on all this stuff that we typically hear about Neptune. Well, let's see what else. Okay, so again, no hard aspects. We're not seeing any hard aspects to this. If anything, the closest thing we're seeing is what's called a hidden aspect, because it's an out of sign square with Mars. So Mars making an out of sign square, and even then it's wide. We're really reaching for this, right? I wouldn't use it so much myself because it's too big an orb for me, but other people might use it. So even then, not really seeing that. So for my own, with my orbs, we don't even have that. We basically have Neptune conjunct Chiron. And the only reason that's important is because it's ruling that midheaven, right? So we're not really seeing it. Well, so you would look at this chart and you would say to yourself, well, geez, like this person isn't going to do anything important in life. I mean, you know, maybe, but certainly nothing earth shaking, right? I mean, what could possibly be notable about this person? So again, pause the video here and take a look at this chart and think about what you're seeing, and if any of this suggests to you that this person is going to do anything even relatively significant in this lifetime. Okay, and when you're ready, you come back. Are you back? That's the chart of Albert Einstein. And again, what's important is that if you look, there's a lack of obvious connections to outer planets. And yet, Albert Einstein made major contributions to science that changed the world and the future. Okay? So what this is to say is that when you see outer planets, it's not an indication that you're going to have dramatic, cataclysmic impact on the world. And not having outer planets connected obviously to your chart somewhere also does not mean that you will not have great cataclysmic impact on the world. These two things are not the same conversation. The thing with outer planets to understand is that outer planets are they're transpersonal planets. So when they show up in a chart, especially in a hard or tight aspect with interpersonal planets in a chart, what this indicates is that that particular individual has access to transpersonal or extrapersonal things outside of themselves, like in the cosmos, that can work through them or with them, using them as a conduit for this information. So visionaries, mystics, psychics, mediums, writers, artists, musicians, scientists, people who have these aha moments like, I don't know, it just came to me, right? These moments of inspiration. With outer planet connections, they're more able to access those experiences because they're here to be used as a conduit and work with the divine consciousness or spirit or whatever you're calling it, right? The universal wonderment. But they have to be open to that experience. So a couple of different things happen with people with outer planet connections. They have to be open to those experiences and they have to be ready for them. If they're not ready for them, it's going to be a little difficult navigating and handling these energies. So oftentimes they're going to feel like they are from Mars, like they don't really fit in with people, like they're having, like we're both talking to each other, but we're having two different conversations, you know? There's always a sense of separateness or aloneness or alienation that they can't quite put their finger on because they never really feel like other people. And the reason is because they're not. But in order for them to access their other capacity to get in touch with this thing that fills them with this sense of mission, and they're not completely sure what for or what the mission is about, they have to be ready for that. So life will often hand them experiences that are extremely difficult to help ready them to become the vessel or the conduit with which this information can flow through. And a lot of that has to do with a deep, deep understanding of the people that are around them, and also, more importantly, a deeper understanding of themselves, and also a breakdown or annihilation of ego, because this really is not about them. This is about them being in partnership with something greater than themselves. So it's outer planet connections to inner planets are not fun to have. Now, does this mean if you have outer planet connections to inner planet that you're absolutely going to become the next great Uri Geller or what is it, Sylvia Brown or whatever, like a great, visionary, mystic, scientist, discoverer or whatever? No, I mean, you have to make the effort to get there. But if you are willing to make the effort to get there, and you are willing to be if you're willing to follow your destiny and allow yourself to become who you're supposed to be, right? And get out of your way and get out of your ego to allow it to happen, and let the divine move you, right? There's a lot of trust and faith that operates in unseen things at this level. Then you'll find that it's much easier to fall into like a rhythm and a step with these things that are there here clearly to partner with you to make things happen. Otherwise, it's just a tough road to hoe the entire time. So Albert Einstein was a genius, but you're not going to see a lot of strong Uranus connections in his chart, which is interesting because Uranus is typically associated with genius, and we're not seeing it strong in his chart like we would expect to see, right? So if you're not seeing it obvious and strong in your chart, do not panic. Like Albert Einstein says, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. So there's a number of different ways that these things can show up. Uranus in your chart will show you where you are a genius or where you have the capacity to be genius, but it will not make you a genius. You have to do that for yourself. Now, so in these pictures, I have a picture of Einstein's chart. I also have a picture of Einstein with an insane hair of his. And this, I thought this was just the best picture ever, right? So Einstein was a Pisces, but he had a lot of Aries in his chart. And he's got that moon in Sag, so he's got a whole lot of foot and mouth disease, and he loved poking the bear. Oh my God, this man loved poking the bear. So one of the reasons this particular picture I like is if you look down here at this guy's hand, clearly Einstein is doing what Einstein does best, and he is goading people or poking people and really kind of, pushing buttons. What a stinker. All right. So Einstein was involved in the Manhattan Project, which is all about the atomic bomb and the development of it. Pretty scary stuff. And one of the great tragedies of Einstein's life and regrets is that, working on the work that if he had known, I think he said this, if he had known how they were going to misuse his work, to do things like build destructive things like bombs and stuff, he would not have done any of that. So that is unfortunate that your gift and genius and art would be misused. But it's a very important moral tale, because just like astrology, your gift and your genius and your art can be misused for destructive things. So it is important that you understand who you're sharing this with and who you're telling this to. You are responsible for your contributions. So if you give a deranged person a loaded gun, you are still just as responsible and culpable for anything that happens as a result of that person having that gun as if somebody else had given it to them, because you should have thought about the long-term impact of what you were doing by making this available to that person. And information, is no different. So be very, very careful about what you say and how you say it, and how this could potentially be misused by the people who hear it. Because when you're talking about human lives, especially children and youth who don't have an identity yet, they're very vulnerable to the messages that are and expectations of who they are that will be given to them. So if you, as the voice of authority, are saying, well, but of course you're going to be this way because, yada, 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 they have nothing to compare it to. So they're going to take it as gospel that this is obviously who they're supposed to be. So that's who they'll be. Children and adults will always live up to or down to your expectations. Okay? Now, quickly also, recommended movies about the Manhattan Project, which I would highly recommend. It's a good piece of history to revisit, especially now that we are on the brink of some pretty unpleasant stuff, because we have, imbeciles and lunatics running the asylum right now. The Moment in Time is available on YouTube for free. It is about the Manhattan Project. It is a documentary, and Fat Man and a Little Boy with Paul Newman in it is circa 1989, is also an excellent movie, but I think you'll have to rent that on Netflix or something. Might be on YouTube. All right, so there. And some interesting factoids about Uranus, since we're talking about geniuses in Uranus. Uranus or Uranus, whichever way you pronounce it, was originally called George's Star for a long time. Many, many years they called it George's Star until they eventually got around to changing its name to Uranus or Uranus, depending on which way you want to look at it. So, among other things, Uranus is the planet that denotes or connotates thinking outside the box. So, Uranus is very much about breaking past boundaries and being experimental in thought and giving themselves permission to pursue lines and tracks of thought that are outside of convention, which is why they're considered nonconformists. They don't want to go where the herd is going. They don't want to be where everybody is. They want to see what's over there or out there, because they know that the really fresh, new, cutting edge stuff is always out there, ahead of the pack or to the left of them, but it's never in the middle of the group. So one of the interesting things about Uranus also, in case you didn't know, I didn't know this, Uranus or Uranus, whichever way you're pronouncing it, is apparently the majority of the planet is made up of hot gas, specifically hot methane gas. So Uranus or Uranus is literally a planet filled with hot methane gas, which is the equivalent of basically a hot fart. Methane is the gas produced by cows and pigs when they fart. So I just thought that was hysterical. That may be why they changed the name to Uranus. Also, the year that Uranus was officially designated as a planet rather than a comet was the same year, speaking of gas, that the hydrogen was discovered and actually used to elevate things like balloons. The first hot air balloons powered by hydrogen gas occurred the year that Uranus was named a planet, not a comet. And also, speaking of hydrogen gas, down here, that a couple years later, or a couple years before, around that time period, the hydrogen bomb was discovered. So, and this little doohickey here is beautiful. So Uranus is about frequency and wavelengths, radio waves, light waves, infrared waves, like you name, sound waves, whatever kind of wave, right, that transmits things. This is what Uranus is about. So light waves, radio waves, sound waves, sonar waves, like pick the wave. So it's very much about waves and frequency. Uranus is all about waves and frequencies, and this is why you're often going to see strongly Uranian people or strong Uranus aspects or rulerships that involve technology, because lots of technology now is very much about waves, light waves, radio waves, microwaves, all kinds of waves and frequencies. So, oh, and one final note, Uranus is also the planet that is associated with the phrase, I wonder what would happen if. All right, so now, my friends, let's talk about the future. This is how to consider a chart for the developing human, Astrology and Ethics in Action 101. All right, so this is the chart of someone, this is the chart of an actual child. And I love this chart because this chart has so many different layers of complexity in it in terms of interpretation. That it's a phenomenal opportunity for us to talk about how to look at charts and how to talk to parents about their children's charts, and how to look at your own children's charts, right? So in this particular chart, here's what we've got on the board. We have Mercury conjunct Pluto, we have the Moon conjunct Uranus, we've got Mercury conjunct Pluto squaring the Moon conjunct Uranus, right? Oh my God, as if that weren't enough. And then on top of everything else, we've got a giant T-square with the Moon, Uranus, Mercury, and Mercury, Pluto, right? Good grief. So there's a lot going on here. So one of the things that I would say is when the first thing that somebody might do when they look at this chart is they might gravitate towards the pretty alarming stuff. But here's the thing, you got to remember this. You have to remember this. Here's the thing, we are dealing with a developing human being, right? So this person doesn't have an identity yet to compare what you're saying to their experiences. So, you know, the difference between dealing with children and adults is that when you're dealing with an adult and you're literally talking about both sides of your hat, right? An adult has the ability to gauge what you're saying compared to their own life experiences and their own understanding of who they are and who they're not up until this point. So they're able to differentiate between what sounds right, what is right, and what's just a lot of BS you're projecting because of your issues and prejudices and biases onto them, right? Hopefully. With a child, they don't have those kinds of comparisons. So everything you say, you know, is an expectation or a guideline about who they obviously they are. Well, this is clearly who I am. And this is not good because you, unless you're very, very on top of it, you are very much driven by your own biases and prejudices, and you need to be very aware of what they are before you go into a reading, and also as you're doing your reading. We need to be able to deliberately and actively try to separate ourselves from our personal prejudices and biases, or recognize when they're happening, okay? So that we can stay on top of that. And I'm going to give you a really good story about this, and then we're going to get into this person's chart. So years ago, I knew a woman who called herself an astrologer. She wasn't. You know, she was like a lot of people who studied a couple of books here and there, had a couple of readings here and there, knew enough to impress her friends, and knew just enough to be right once in a while, which made her really dangerous, because everything else was just her hawking and conning and doing all sorts of stuff. Now, to give you some background information, this woman had a granddaughter that was adopted. So it wasn't a blood relation. It was an adopted granddaughter. And the granddaughter was born in Mexico. So the parents unknown, right? But clearly of Mexican heritage. And the woman who was my friend at the time was your standard, like right off the factory assembly line, hillbilly. Like foot stomping, clogging, moonshine running hillbilly. Like a little bit more, a little bit more civilized than that. But still, I mean, this is, you know, this is where we're coming from. And the area she lived in, which was not my neighborhood, but close enough I could visit her, which I didn't do too often because I didn't like the area, was very much big redneck hillbilly area. So you can imagine all the stereotypes that those folks like, and this was 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, you can imagine all the stereotypes those folks like to perpetuate about everybody that wasn't them, right? So, and every group that wasn't them had their own set of stereotypes and prejudices and assumptions about who they were and all sort of stuff. So my friend was no exception. So I've seen her with her kids, and I've seen her, so I don't think she, thank God, I don't think she ever had this conversation with her granddaughter, because her granddaughter lived with her parents, or my friend's daughter and her husband somewhere else. And I'm sure her daughter's well aware of who her mother was. Anyway, but she would talk about her granddaughter, like literally she didn't expect this kid to live to see 18, and she just looked at this chart, and it's Neptune and Pluto and whatever, and Mercury, quincunx, you know, it was Snoopy, you know, and so clearly the daughter was going to become a prostitute and a crack addict and an alcoholic, and, you know, she's going to date all sorts of horrible men because she's got poor judgment, and, you know, yada, 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 and this, that, and the other thing, and clearly she was never going to be very bright, and if she's lucky she'd get, you know, some kind of, it was bad. Like, Jesus, I'm glad this woman wasn't my grandmother. So, you know, the thing about it is, like, when you listen to it and you listen to her talk about other stuff, you're like, maybe, I don't know, like, is she serious? Like, is that really in the chart? But then also too, like, I also saw how the males in her family, the sons and grandsons, the male sons and grandsons in her family fared with her, and she's got a lot of issues with men, a lot of issues with the men, and she really contributed to a lot of psychological damage with those boys. And I'm not going to get into it too much here, but it's looking back, it's very clear that a good portion of this was her. You know, it was just her and all this constant reinforcement of all this really toxic stuff and it really did a number on those boys. So she was not a healthy, happy, non-toxic person. She had a lot of her own crap. And this is to say that just because somebody knows astrology doesn't make them a good person. And learning astrology will not make you a good person. Being a good person is a whole separate trip from information. So, there was a time when you couldn't learn astrology unless an astrologer, approved of you and took you aside and mentored you and wanted to share this information with you selectively. Now you can get this information everywhere and anywhere and freely and abundantly, which is good and bad. It is good because now people who would not otherwise have access to this information because they live, in places where it's not big major metropolitan areas, just don't have that access, can now, get on board and get the information. It's bad because there's a lot of people who I wouldn't trust to counsel a deaf dog, like my friend who called herself an astrologer for a lot of years. Who learn just enough astrology to be dangerous and then run around creating all kinds of havoc and hurt and damage to people's psyche because she is seen as the voice of authority. And the problem is she may be the voice of authority in appearance, but when it comes to actually knowing what she's talking about and being responsible and having any integrity with it, completely missing, completely missing. Even if she had known more astrology, she still had no sense of integrity in her speech, and here's the thing, she could not separate her prejudices and biases from what was coming out of her mouth. So if she had specific ideas about who you were, chart aside, like if she had specific ideas about who you were and what you were capable of or going to accomplish in life because of how you presented to her, by gender, by race, by income, that was it. The entire reading got slanted through that filter through her because I've watched it, I've listened to it. It's just insidious. It's just insidious. And the last time I talked to her, her granddaughter did live past 18, by the way, and was well into her 20s, her early 20s, and was getting married. So she did not have a teen pregnancy. She did not die by the time she was 18. She never ended up on drugs or with addiction problems. She did not have a string of bad boyfriends. She did not end up with some menial labor job because that was the best she was ever going to do. Like all this string of horrific predictions that my friend was absolutely committed to for this poor adopted girl never came to pass. In fact, her granddaughter turned out to be completely, thank God for her parents, completely well-adjusted, happy, healthy, smart, and competent and capable. And I'm sure now, all these decades later, if I went back and looked at that chart, I can tell you exactly how this was not in this girl's chart. But, at the time, I only knew slightly more than she did. And I just, yeah, but what a learning lesson. So all of this is to say, you have to be able to pull your personal prejudices and biases out of your readings. You have to be able to be on top of that for yourself. Because if you cannot be that person, you're not any good to anybody except your own damn ego. And that's not okay. That's not what astrology is here for. It is not here to serve your ego. Oh my gosh. Or your vanity or your conceit. It's here to help other people be better versions of themselves. And if you can't commit to that and get out of your own way to allow that to happen, you don't need to be doing this. End of lecture. And this is even more critically important when we're dealing with children who don't have any way of comparing what you're saying to who they know they are, right? A lot more, there's so much more responsibility that goes in and ethical integrity that goes into dealing with children and children's charts. So, all right. So with this chart, there's a lot of stuff going on here that would typically, send the alarm bells going, like, oh, like the whole astrology Chicken Little thing, like, oh my God, Moon, Uranus, Mercury, Pluto, whoa, murderer, rapist, drug addict, criminal, whoa. But I do not believe that this is the case. So I'm much more optimistic about this. So this child with this chart has a very special mission in life, and they're going to always feel like they've got a special mission. It's going to be difficult for them to get a sense of what that mission is because there are so many developmental things that are going to happen along the way. And ultimately, their expression, their identity, all that sense of mission that they have is going to be hooked into their ability to suspend and let go of their ego and allow themselves to be a conduit or channel for something greater than themselves. so that that information or transmission can come through them. They're here to partner with something greater than themselves. Like a lightning rod, they're there to attract the lightning and let it flow through them, right? So that's a bit of a challenge. That's a bit of a challenge. So let's take a look at the chart. For those of you who study and practice astrology, this is a great place to pause, take a look at the chart, make your own notes about what you would expect to see or how you would interpret different things in this chart. And when you're ready, come back and hit play. Yeah, what is this?